accomplished?
Thank you, Dr. Donoghue. I think I'd like to say that throughout my terms in the legislature, I have been very, very much interested in education. I mean, that's something that is at my core because I believe in the power of education to really transform lives. And I have particularly been interested in expanding our students' access to higher education. And so even beginning in the 30th legislature, one of the very successful pieces of legislation was to get the Hotel Development Act amended so that there would be a provision of $200,000 annually in scholarships to students who want to study hotel or hospitality management or related studies in both districts, and that should be an annual requirement of any development in the territory. This year, I continued to focus on education because I attended the adult continuing education program, as I have to remember that, ACE. And those students who complete those programs have done essentially the same as those students in the day programs, but they don't have access or didn't have access to the VAL and the SAL scholarships. And when we say we want to encourage those students as well, adult learners, to continue their education, I think we have to put our money behind that kind of language. And so I convinced my colleagues to amend the legislation so that going forward those students would be able to achieve, to get those scholarships as well. I have another piece that's in the hopper, and that relates to the economic development program, because what I want to see is that each company that receives a benefit from the territory provides at least the equivalent of one full-time scholarship to the University of the Virgin Islands annually. That would, I think, double what they're required to put now towards educational programs for our students. So I will continue to work on those kinds of initiatives. In your reciting of some of the items, I wanted to speak on one of the more recent ones, which concerns a lot of people who live in the territory and outside of the territory, and represents a really critical component of our economy, and that is the government employees retirement system. And you know that has been in the public conversation for quite a while with regard to its financial health. I wanted to amplify on that a little because recently we had a meeting, the Senate was called into a meeting with the government employees retirement system, and I think, of course, some of the information was not new, but the new part of it was the proposal that they put on the table to reduce the annuities by 30%. And that very same week, that was a Monday, and we met as a legislature the Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. When we were in our meeting, we talked about the governor's bonding proposal. And what the governor essentially sent down was a proposal to issue bonds in the amount of somewhere around $426 million. And there were a variety of things. We talked about working capital, we talked about the consent decree for the closure of the landfills in both districts, we talked about support of the 2 public hospitals in the territory, and then of course proposed capital projects that the governor had sent down. And when we got into our meeting, because everybody had different ideas about where these would go, and when we got into our meeting, Senator Liebert was the one who raised it first, and he said, you know, this thing with GERS, I don't think we're paying enough attention to it. And then the conversation just went all over, as you know it would, with 15 people in a room. And when it was my turn to speak, I said, you know, I want to come back to where Senator Liebert left off, because I don't think that we paid attention sufficiently to what he said, because I too believe that we have to do something critical at this moment. And I said, I believe we should put an infusion of cash into the GERS that is no less than $100 million. And again, much discussion, and eventually most of the colleagues agreed. Now, we know that the backdrop to this is GERS saying that it needs something like $1.4 billion to address primarily the unfunded liability that has resulted from retirement programs created in the past and not funded. We know that. But we know, if we are honest with ourselves, we know that there is no way that the Virgin Islands government can instantly access 1.4 billion or 1.7 billion to put into that system. And so to me, I ask myself the question, does it mean that if you can't put all in at this moment that you should do nothing? Well, of course, the answer for me is no. And some people have scoffed at the 100 million and said, well, how much will it impact the system? Well, I do not see that as being in isolation. I see it as a beginning. And we have to look at the things that the legislature has also done in the past that cannot fix the problem in its entirety, but we can continue along those paths. So, for instance, the government, through a tax case, recently acquired a company that has mineral rights in several of the states. And the legislature has voted to put all of the income derived from that acquisition into the retirement system. I think with some exception for a small amount that will go to the elderly, the senior citizen centers in the territory. And what I envision is, yes, the 100 million, yes, looking at other infusions of cash into the system, but I think what we have to do is to create streams of income separate and apart from the contributions that go in and support the system. And there are several of us who have come up with ideas. And in fact, when the actuaries for GERS spoke, I asked them about one of the suggestions that the actuary made, and it was about a dedicated tax. And I said, well, tell me, what would a dedicated tax have to generate to make an impact on the system as you have described it? And he said, well, a dedicated tax would have to bring in somewhere in the nature of about 10% of what the obligations of the system are. Either, he said, on an annual or a monthly basis. And so we are looking at things that will create other streams of income, because we cannot just rely on the contributions. And I just wanted to say that for those people who scoff at the 100 million, it was something done in earnest with regard to trying to respond to this threat of the reduction in annuities, because we have to remember that the people who it will affect are people who worked for the government of the Virgin Islands when the minimum salary was not even $20,000. So if you have people who are living on even on $20,000 a year, we can't possibly, as a society, think that those people can live, who have done their duty, who have given so much of their lives to the government of the Virgin Islands, that we can approve such a reduction. And I think it's incumbent on us to continue to find ways to do it. But I just wanted to highlight that because I wanted to give people a history of how it occurred, and whether they think 100 million is nothing, it was something really done in earnest.
Very well.